question I would like to post is to Professor Ajit. Dear Elvis, I want you to actually take up what Professor Samrajiva said, because you're coming from the Coordinating Secretariat for Science, Technology and Innovation that was set up in February 2013. So you have quite a lot of experience now trying to coordinate a lot of activity, including innovation across ministries, across many organizations. So Professor Samrajiva touched on something very interesting, an innovation ecosystem. Do you think we already have something like that here, right? And if you do you think we need to reinvent it, or is it good enough? And there's also one more thing that I would like to challenge you or ask you. He also spoke about the implementation, and he spoke about a supra-ministerial task force. Do such things work? What is your opinion? What is coming from the government sector? I would like you to elaborate on that.
First of all, Professor Samrajiva mentioned something very interesting, and I think as Sri Lankans we should take up, which is the current position of Sri Lanka in the GII, which actually Sri Lanka has been slipping, right? It's not something that we should be proud of. It's an index that measures the innovation capability, capacity, and you can see countries as small as Switzerland is consistently on the top, and countries as small as Singapore is consistently on the top, right? Because they have set and they have done, they have produced, technically innovated. It's doable, and I don't think our aspiration should be to in this low middle income 10. We should try to be better. We're actually one of the best in terms of the efficiency of inputs to output conversion at some time back. It's there in few years back. We have now slipped even from that top 10. In that, so it's a sad situation. But we took this into our hearts at the Costi at one point when we started, but we started Sri Lanka Innovation Index. We put the first pillar out, that is a governance pillar. The reason for putting that is beyond our control, right? And there's a host of other organizations and the rest can work on it. But we thought we will take on the S&T infrastructure, the rest of the stuff that's enabled the innovation to take place. And we've kind of identified the Sri Lanka Innovation Index, what we called as SLINDEX. And then also we went down to Provincial Innovation Index doing that. Because if you look at, we are not making use of what we have. Answering your question of whether do we have an ecosystem. Yes, it's disconnected, it's disjoint. I mean, if you take, how many of us know that there are 49 research institutes under 18 line ministries? I'm referring to the current gazetted, the allocation. That's pretty dynamic distribution because it changes. But nevertheless, that's what we have, 49 research institutes of varied sizes and forms within 18 ministries. And the university system, 17 in the public university system, under 3 ministries. So we're talking about around 66 institutes that are capable of R&D and being part of the innovation process under 20 line ministries. Which means there can be duplication. And as a country which spent 0.1% of the GDP on R&D, we are way below even the lowest, LDCs. In the percentage income that they spend on R&D. Of course, some can argue the issue should not be doing R&D, and that's different. But the point is, these are yardsticks, the measurements that are commonly applied, so I may as well stick to that for the moment. But we are doing 0.1%. So the recommended is 1%. So we're talking about a tenfold increase even to reach what is called the normal for an LDC. And anywhere 1% R&D on GDP is a recommended value. So we are way below. So we have a very small input spread across in the public system, there's a large number of institutes and places. That's considered a problem, but certainly you need people to work on and then ensuring that the amount of money that you spend actually gets some decent deliverables. That's how I suppose is the efficiency. So you need coordination. So we do have a system, we have a ecosystem which is not connected. To support that again, we do have, say like the ICT, we have nanosalars right across Sri Lanka around the 200 plus. Then our own ministry, we have Vidata centers, which is bringing science to the rural, the communities, the extension service almost. We have about 300 nearly across Sri Lanka. But we will find Nanasala is not talking to Vidata, no Vidata to Nanasala, because they are operating in different compartments, right? And but resources are spread thin, But when you do not make use of the synergy, it's an unfortunate situation. We believe strongly there's an important for coordination, and whenever you ask a question, we normally come out and say in groupings, okay, one of our problems is lack of coordination. But then as coordinators, we found coordinators are really hated, right? You try to coordinate, it's not one of those the jobs that you like to be in sometimes. You see the value of it, but it's not really appreciated, but we need to accept it and we need to do it because we cannot change the system that we talk about in 66 and so on. So my quick answer now in that is yes, we have it, but we need to understand it because private sector doesn't understand what the public sector offers, and perhaps public sector may not exactly understand what the private sector needs, but that's need to be bridging by communication. We need to do that. Let's make use of the resources that we have and also a planned approach to increasing that resource base, that's what we are giving. Private sector putting on R&D is much less than the government. So coordination is essential, but the supra ministry, to me, what I see is now from a Costy's personal point of view, the government has taken a decision to make it a coordinating authority for science, technology and innovation. Let's hope that to materialize in time to come, the cabinet has accepted it. It's moving through the legal draftment. So I'm not sure about supra-ministerial, but at least you need somebody who understands what's going on and do a facilitating role.
Okay, let's move to the other panelists and look at a few experiences more in the private sector. And actually, I would like to direct this to Major General Moniral from Bcash. We like to, Bcash was set up to take mobile money across in the Bangladesh, across to everybody in Bangladesh, and it has been now operating for a few years. So I would like to get your experience, has Bcash been able to penetrate into the low income masses in Bangladesh, such that it created a positive impact? And if so, can you sort of share your experience and the challenges that you faced, because it's something quite important.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, financial inclusion was one of the important agenda of Bangladesh government. Because if we looked at the statistics, we found out that only 15% of adult population in Bangladesh had a formal banking account. Whereas we have a high penetration of mobile phones. About 70% of our adult population possess a cell phone. And the idea of bridging the gap with the help of this technological device was basically the driving force for getting into MFS business. The MFS started its journey in Kenya with M-Pesa in 2007. And the one that established Bikash actually carried out his research for about 4 years. He had visited Kenya to understand how it operates, and then came back and spoke to a few of the other people, especially the regulator, that's the central bank. The central bank, knowing that this would be actually dealing with financial service, decided that this should be a bank-led model. So our one is a bank-led model. Obviously, the central bank wanted a bank to be partnered if any other investor was interested to get into this business. So first, it was Money in Motion, LLC, a US-based entrepreneurship company. They partnered with Bragg Bank. Bragg, of course, is the largest NGO in the world that you possibly know, and they have a bank. So it was the majority share went to Bragg Bank, and it was Money in Motion who actually was the minority shareholder, and through that, the inception of Bikash took place in 2010. The central bank issued 28 licenses to 28 banks, but 17 came into operation. Because it was something little different. It was a subsidiary, not one particular wing or a product of the bank. So it has one single focus, that was to provide MFS to the lower segment of economic pyramid. That means the poorer people who did not have access to formal banking. Because a large portion of our country, obviously, are villages. 68,000 villages in Bangladesh. So the banks with brick and mortar arrangement and the manpower deployed cannot have their branches to actually offer services to these people. The other reason was that these people do not actually have large ticket size, which the banks look for. Obviously, the banks were not interested to serve with people coming with maybe 1,000 BTT, which is close to about 2,000 Sri Lankan rupees. So after bKash started his journey in providing mobile financial service, in 2013, IFC of World Bank became an equity partner. And in 2014, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation also invested into the company. Now, the things were very simple. The banks or the financial institutions or the subsidiary was to provide the service. The MNOs are to provide the gateway to get people connected. And the customers use their personal cell phone with a SIM to open an account and operate. Now, after about 6 years, where do we stand? We have 28 million registered customers. We conduct 4.9 million transactions per day through an agent network of 176,000 agents. And a study of Dhaka University suggests 87% of the rickshaw pullers of Dhaka send their money home through bKash. And the volume that we transact on a regular basis is $100 million, which is equivalent to 8.3 billion taka, or maybe 15 billion Sri Lankan rupees. So that's a huge amount of money that we deal. We say that actually we deal with anchovies, the small fishes. The big fish would always go to the bank, and bankers are very much interested. But look at the kind of accumulated money that we deal. And there is always a float. And what happens with that? We actually have entire of the cash deposited in banks. Unless that is done, equivalent amount of bKash or e-money is not delivered. So the banks hold that money, which is a large sum of money. And obviously you know that as entrepreneurs, you can then use that money for making hospitals, factories, or whatever. So that's how bKash has contributed to the economy of Bangladesh. There is a significant growth in our GDP, and we think it should range between 5 to 6% of our contribution, in the sense of only providing the service, but it's about the money that our common people is to keep under the mattress, now have put into their personal accounts, and that particular total amount is in the banks. We operate with support of 14 banks. It was initially only Bragg Bank, and the central bank, realizing that Bragg Bank branches are not so many, has allowed us to partner with any banks. And so far we have done with 14 banks. They do our cash management. So one thing that needs to be understood, that for any amount of e-money that needs to be taken out of the bank, equal amount of cash money must be deposited. So it is in any point in time is equal. Cash money equal to the e-money circulated in the market. We are thinking of further innovation, bringing in more products so that our customers get more interest in using the MFS. And obviously, it's all about technological advancement. We are thinking of apps which would allow our semi-literate or half-literate people to navigate through and conduct transaction. This is very affordable. The lowest that is charged is in Bangladesh, and that's a study of the C-Gap. is very convenient because we have the network at walking distance anywhere in Bangladesh. And then, of course, it is very fast. Every transaction can be done within 90 seconds, anywhere within Bangladesh. And it is through a secure means because every transaction is recorded in the data, and the recipient and the sender is given a SMS that shows the current balance sheet of that particular transaction. Hopefully, in future, in next 6 months to 1 year, we would turn out to be the largest MFS in the world. Thank you all.
Thank you. Linda, you have directly been involved using digital technology in disrupting a traditional retail model in this highly competitive garment industry and through your fashionmarket.lk. That's what I want to talk about. And not have you only made a mark here, you have actually broken into the $35 billion garment sector in India, the fashion sector in India, which is amazing. Would you like to talk something about that to us and tell us something about your experience, learnings, as well as what you think the government can do in terms of supporting, people like you taking it forward out to the world?
Yes, so our most recent experience has come from the digital space really and leveraging online. So what we've been able to do is use this whole online and digital space to really own our own retail. Now, Sri Lanka is a really small country. So right from the beginning, it's been like we've got to go global. We've got to own a market outside. So our most recent success, like Dumindra shared, is with fashionmarket.lk, where we've been really able to take a total product from a village in Sri Lanka right to an end global consumer. So the reason now, the most exciting times right now is the potential of digital and that you can really go right to an end consumer with what you have. But actually, we wouldn't have been able to take this journey if we didn't have an authentic product in the first place. So what this whole digital and online space is also allowing you to do, as much as it's allowing you to go directly to the consumer, you've got to also have an authentic product to take there. So we've been a bit fortunate because, I'm a hardcore Sri Lankan entrepreneur, and over the last 10 years or so, we've been able to create a design sector in Sri Lanka that's worked for our own country. So right from the beginning, from launching Sri Lanka's first design institute, college, to creating our own design talent that would actually look at what our country had to offer. Now this model is obviously applicable across South Asia. So if you looked at what we have at our doorstep, it's really a great apparel industry. Then we have grassroots level cottage industries. So it was really not about designing some silly stuff, doing some pretty sketches, but actually creating the talent that would take this, manufacturing industries we had and create a global product out of it. So that's the journey that we've been on the last 10 years. And over the last 2 years, we've used digital to take it global and actually commercialize the product. Now to answer your question, Dumi, as to what the government can really do, I think one is our journey over the next 2 years is really we believe that Sri Lanka can play a role in being the South Asian design innovation hub. And just a couple of days ago, we launched a project called the Colombo Innovation Tower, which is a massive project. And again, not alone, but working with all these industries, like the apparel industry, who really use design and innovation, and all of their buyers are asking for it now. So really collaborating with everyone and being, really the government working really with the private sector in owning that own space and making a declaration and saying, Sri Lanka can actually, be South Asia's design and innovation hub. We get visits from Bangladesh to India to everyone, asking for design innovation to come into those countries. So really owning that space, substantiating our position, and even creating a cell within the government. Then the other is engaging, get the diplomatic community involved, right? We are not the first to do this. Britain has something called Creative Britain, which is the creative industries. They did a roadmap. And they really tie it into, economic benefit. They really say Britain's, creative industries, and they show how the creative industries contributes to wealth generation, economic development, and all of that. Singapore's gone the same journey. The Dutch were the first to use design innovation and take it across the industries. So we have a lot. So second task for the government is create the cell, engage all these diplomatic communities who are waiting to do that. I guess finally that cell should service our own industries and should also service South Asia. And I'm making this statement with a lot of responsibility that we do have a following from South Asia asking for this. I mean, like East Asia has done, or the Middle Eastern market. Imagine what a powerful force we can be out of South Asia. Across all our countries, we have amazing cottage industries. We have high-tech manufacturing. If we have the right kind of design, which we've created in a very responsible way, we can be such a powerful force, and we can contribute globally in a big way. And Sri Lanka can be leading that agenda. So that's where I see our journey over the next few years, and I hope the government, to collaborate with the government more. And finally, actually, people think digital the digital economy, the creative economy are things out there. They're not, they're part of today. I mean, everybody is talking about the millennial. We are currently about to, have the Z generation coming. They are digital natives, so it's not something out there, it's something, it is going to be what we can leverage, especially for a small country like ours to go global. We need to leverage digital. And we need to live in that space. If you can't live in that space, you need to surround yourself with the age category that can live in that space and leverage them. So this digital and creative economy go hand in hand. And I believe for a small country like us, really, at least in our sector, which contributes to a lot to the economy and to service all our industries and really take that journey would be the space the government needs to go, I believe.
Thank you, Linda. Now from garments to agriculture. I'd like to direct this to Mr. Samantha Ranatunga. CIC has been involved in the agriculture and livestock sector since its inception, initially with products and solutions, and then with subsequently venturing into the production and retail. I would like to hear your thoughts on how you have used technology to play a bigger role in the agribusiness and the production and the retail at CIC, and how this could be rolled out on an inclusive manner even into the small sector, the small farmers and the small sector of agriculture here in Sri Lanka.
Take agriculture, I think in any economic forum, agriculture is the bad boy of the forum, because when you take the Sri Lankan GDP, we contribute about 10%. Agriculture contributes 10% to the GDP, but employing nearly about 30% of the Sri Lankan people. So I think this is where I think our first conundrum lies. The agriculture automatically becomes an item of political interest because of the large population it impacts. And it keeps, and if you have people with issues, and agriculture has kept people in issues, that creates a living and a purpose for the politicians. So I think this is something we have to take it into a different forum and try to see whether we can find answers in a different platform. And I think in that way, the fact that we are looking at technology, I think is an eye-opener. And I was very encouraged when I got this question from Dubindra. If we take a look at, I think agriculture has basically been, I think, the bane of technology, because if you take our agriculture, which we have as export agriculture, we celebrated 150 years, I think, which showed and showcased a fair amount of history. I think the amount of technology that it's also showed the paucity of the amount of technology that is there in the industry. If you take paddy, it has been the same, because we still perpetuate the traditional forms of agriculture, and we have gone on. But I think this has caused till about the last 20 years. This has been the way it has been. The way we have continued. And I think the fact that we have an exodus of people, especially the youth, leaving agriculture, I think has made people to just step back and look at this issue in a different way. I think this is where we have now seen the forays into technology, where I think looking at applying of fertilizer, applying of weather control conditions. These are some aspects which I think we had shunned aside. We have said that these are not things that were needed, were required. But we have seen in agriculture the last 3 seasons have been disasters. Now we see a renewed interest in covered agriculture, where we are trying to control the climate that we have around. This was done earlier in the very developed countries, but now we see it as a business model, even not at the most high level of computerized control, but even having at least covered agriculture, where we put a polythene sheet and put a PVC frame and try to cover and keep the sunshine out, is now being practiced in a lot of areas which was never thought of as it was possible. So I think the fact that we have had issues of the weather, kids who are thinking differently, who are adapting technology, who through various forms are getting influenced, we have seen that how this has brought in some of the new ideas. And so as a company, we have basically gone, we have gone into livestock, which is basically again covered livestock, where we do not allow grazing. I think this is again, most of the modern companies it has happened. We have gone into crop, which is basically undercover and with weather control, where the vagaries of the weather is impacting on the minimal basis. And this also has found much better and more lucrative markets. And also we have seen how in applying of fertilizer or pesticides, more scientific methods where soil analysis and testing is being done. I think the fact that the environmental pushback, which the companies have had in the recent past, has helped us to also rethink our strategy in some of the inputs and the way we use inputs. So these have meant that the technology, not in the maybe in the digital space right now, but in the normal scientific space, where there is much more technology that is being used. In the digital space, I think we still lack. We are way behind countries like India, Indonesia, Malaysia, where I think there are a lot of farmers which are using virtual markets, virtual weather stations, and this type of aspect is we are still very new, is new in Sri Lanka. There are some initiatives which are currently being done by, I know, our company and some of our other agriculture companies with some of the leading mobile operators. We are involved in it. But I think this is a journey which has started, maybe a little bit too late in the day, but I think this is a journey which we must go. If we need to keep the future generations in agriculture, we have to introduce more technology. So I think we have started the journey, but I'm still not sure whether we have started it too late, because the amount of people who have abandoned agriculture is fairly phenomenal. And still, when you go to the rural areas, it's still the youth are away, but it's the parents who are basically tilling the fields now, which is a disturbing sign. How do we take this more popular? How do we take technology to the farming communities? I think the government has had many efforts, and as Professor Alvis said, the collaborative nature is a challenge. Government has always has its ways. The people, the private sector and the farmers go their own individual way, the government goes its individual way. The collaborative nature, I think, has to be brought in to see how we can work together. And the amount of platforms that we create where the public and the private sector, along with the individual farmers, could interact together and pass technology to one another and adapt technologies and strengthen each other, I think is the only way that we can make this a viable situation where our GDP can be contributed greater by agriculture, and that we can get out of the trap of the poverty in agriculture, which will make it something which is more lucrative for the nation's development.
Thank you, Samantha. So from agriculture, now we head to IT. Though I said technology is not only IT. Gihan, Millennium is probably one of the more well-known examples of Sri Lankan company achieving global success, especially via technological innovation. How can we replicate the factors behind Millennium's success to create a more success, lot more success stories? And how do you think that this will transform our economy?
I have to give you a two-part answer. So let me talk about the first part, which is about how we could potentially replicate Millennium success. And if you look at the factors behind Millennium success, actually a lot of it echoes really what Professor Ron was saying earlier, essentially. If you look at how Millennium made it big, Millennium's built on a few things. One is incredible talent, right? So essentially we've always needed to point to hire the best talent, and that's obviously a replicatable function. Certainly we can obviously invest more in producing more graduates, more IT graduates. That's an easy thing to do. Leveraging capital. So in the early days of Millennium, certainly a lot of angel funding, a lot of VC funding, difficult 20 years ago, easier now. If we create that ecosystem, certainly we can create more startups, and a higher probability of some of them will go global. The going global part, I think, is, in my view, the real differentiator. And Millennium benefited from having a visionary founder, an unusually visionary founder who's also an incredible salesman, actually. So Tony Wiedersinger, who's in town these days. And he, so he took what would have been essentially he took a very global view, a very long-term view, and pushed a fairly talented set of young chaps to do, shall we say, great things. The third one, harder to replicate, to be fair. But again, I suppose it's a numbers game. If you get more and more startups, there's a higher probability you'll see more of those. So that's the Millennium part, shall we say. I have a slightly different angle to this, though. So if you're talking about transforming the economy, so let's say we do this. Let's say we do encourage VC, angel funding. We should obviously expand IT education. Let's say we are successful and we replicate Millennium. We have 10 Millenniums in 10 years' time. That would be a fabulous outcome. That would be a transformative outcome from the IT industry. Would it transform the economy? Maybe not. A Millennium employs 700 people. 10 Millennium, 7,000 people. Call it 10,000 with a little bit of expansion. If we're talking about transforming the economy, I suppose we should be talking about hundreds of thousands, transforming millions of people's lives. So I think, certainly, when you talk about innovation, there's sort of two angles. One angle is in my view at least, the invention of technology, R&D and incubating startups and creating new technology. The Millenniums of this world, not just Millenniums, Slintech, there's a number of examples of great Sri Lankan companies inventing technology and achieving success. But I think if you really want, in my personal opinion, if you want scale and you want to transform the economy through technology, we have to think also about the application of technology, of existing technology. And we were talking about this earlier, right? So the simplest example is if you take the computing revolution, personal computers, mobile computers, etc. It's been certainly 40 years of computing. But if you look at the state sector, country's largest employer, you walk into a police station, not a lot of computers there. A typewriter is the most advanced thing you see in a police station. You walk into a post office, not a lot of computers there. I mean, in general, that there is a huge opportunity with very basic technology to radically increase productivity. And I think there's value in thinking about how we can do that, how we can promote that, how, to be frank, the state, I suppose, can incentivize, possibly subsidize, possibly sponsor, promote the adoption of technology and leverage that and drive productivity. And I think that's how you really get scale and you really get transformative. I'll stop there. I have other anecdotes, but I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you, Gihan. I think we are moving into question and answer. I have got a few here. I'll start, to be fair, with the first question that I got. and it's open to anyone here, so we all can talk. It's digitization and automation will make some jobs obsolete. Is there a plan to amend the rigid labor laws? If not, how can companies get the maximum benefit?
Well, when the BPO industry was coming, that was around 2002, 2003, and we were trying to create this industry. This issue came up because we have laws in this country which say women cannot be employed at night. I didn't think this was the highest priority for us because I really didn't want to get this, get Sri Lanka into this, outcalling the sort of the worst aspects of BPO sector. We felt that we needed to go for a higher segment. But ideally, so we didn't really push that. We didn't have much time either. We didn't really push that. That was, but I do think, what is this logic? That somehow women can't buy alcohol in this country? I don't know whether you know that. There's a law on the books which says a woman cannot buy alcohol. And women cannot work at night. What kind of patronizing attitude is this? These are all British laws, by the way, right? Not ours. So I honestly think these things should be removed. But on the other hand, and I think we should have the flexibility, you want to put safeguards, let's talk about safety in the buses, right? Our buses are like hell for women, right? Let's talk about real problems, not unreal problems. And the BPO industry actually is running massive transportation fleets, as far as I can figure out. And, if there's some safety issues there, we could focus on that and solve that problem. But I do think we need to look at all our laws and try to change them, but I'm just admitting that wasn't the highest priority when I was in government.
Yeah?
My area so much,
Because
but essentially...
the question also is sort of directed towards this point where automation will make some jobs redundant.
Of course.
And then, how in a country like us, in a developing country like us, how could the government help us in making sure that it does not create a conflict as we know what's happening outside,
So that's the thing. As I understand, there's no easy answer. I think we had asked this question 5 years ago. The pat response from somebody on the panel would have been, it's fine, retraining will sort it all out, we'll retrain everybody and it'll be okay. Clearly, the pace of automation is going to outpace the retraining ability. We get that. If you want my personal opinion about the risks here, I think they're less. I think if you look at sort of the cost of the technologies we're talking about, I don't think in the immediate near term we're necessarily going to have the kind of redundancy we're talking about, say, in the US with truck drivers, for example. I would like to think. Again, I can't say I'm an expert, but I think it's fair to say it's a very real problem that we need to think about. There's no pat answer. Retraining is the obvious answer. Retraining is, I think everybody would accept, much more difficult than anybody realizes. And I'm sure Samantha would probably comment on, if you talk about automation in agriculture, the practicality of retraining somebody who's been farming his whole life. Not that straightforward. I can't really give you a definitive answer. It's a policy that we need to think about. I don't think anybody in the world has really figured it out right now.
Yeah, I was reading an interesting article which basically was focusing on this whole thing, where one day even buses would be driven by the bus itself,
Sure.
and we would hardly need people to do the jobs. And then what would the people do? And this article was all talking about how people would be playing games and making money out of playing games. I think it's a question that really many have not looked at. And definitely, yes, there's a question about redundancy. But I think on one side, though there's automation, people cannot be taken out completely. There is always a need. Professor?
Yeah, the Indian software industry is beginning to see some effects, right? There has been job loss in that. But I think the issue is, what is our selling proposition here, particularly in the IT and IT-enabled services? That has not been the sort of mundane, quality check, software testing kind of stuff. So I think it's going to be, as you said, it's going to be less of a problem here. And in addition, I think, we need to be a little cautious about some of the scare tactics stories that are coming. When in the telecom industry, we had large numbers of people, women in particular, who used to operate switchboards. And there was all this concern that, there would be some incredible problem if the switchboards were eliminated by the automatic exchanges. And then the opposite of it is that if you had switchboards for the current usage of telecommunications, we would have to have more than half the population of each country operating switchboards. So let's take this periodic scare stories with a grain of salt.
Okay, let's move on. And that's quite an interesting question, and I'd like to put to the panel. Most probably, Professor Ajit, you should be able to answer this or help. What hope do we have in legal framework getting uplifted to safeguard innovation and design safe with better IP laws and cross-border IP protection for Lankan innovation?
There is an ongoing program with the National Intellectual Property Office and the World Intellectual Property Office actually supporting Sri Lanka has. I think it's a very good platform to pass this idea. That's what is happening. There's a 10-point action plan with WIPO, NIPO, and with the Sri Lankan universities, research institutes, and it's open to public-private, participating into improve what is called enabling Sri Lankan IP infrastructure environment. So there's a lot of activity that is scheduled to happen. Starting from Sri Lanka, I do see what Professor Samarajiva put in as, we do have a weak IP system concept. There's a strong perception that we are very poor in this regard. But I would say it is more so not the lack of rules and regulation, but more so the implementation and how much we value that in our day-to-day decision making, right? Most of, if you ask from even up to the blue chips, you go and ask what is your patent portfolio, what's your value on the intangible assets of your organization. Such discussions do not come in. We are much more on the asset base, what we can see, what's immobile. So IP, the intangible assets, the knowledge-based concepts is not there in our decision-making process. We need to put that in. I mean, remember, even if you take United States, of course I'm taking the #1 economy, but 33% plus of the GDP comes from, it's come from intangible assets, right? The trademarks, the copyrights, the intellectual property, etc. So there's a huge lesson that we can take, because from our side, we do not have the numbers to compete in some of these other markets that are emerging. We don't have the billions, we don't have even the lakhs or the millions. But what we should understand is what we lack in numbers, we should have in terms of quality and then the ability. We must leverage on the quality and the ability. Technically, we talk about high literate nation, literacy very high, but you ask the question, what do we read? And we need to leverage on some of these abilities and getting this, the intellectual property, because if you take a simple startup, Waze, which is in Israel, I remember Israel one because we sold one of our IPs, transfer happened about 3.1 million at that point with Slintech, and at the same time read the news item about 3.1 billion, which was this transport app by Waze in Israel, small startup. Yeah, it's US dollar billion, whereas we were on US million 3.1, right? See the order of magnitude. That's a potential of a couple of people putting their thinking right, doing the design, coming up with something, and also protecting it. So innovation is supported really when you have a solid IP environment also. FDIs are benefited by Sri Lanka communicating that we have a very good, strong protective mechanism for IP. I think FDIs depend on a solid, good, what I would call valuable FDIs. Look at what is how the IP environment in the country, right? Whether your stuff that are coming in is very easily can get lost or get copied, then you don't really like to put things here. So there is a project that are happening, but I suppose the much more important is the private sector and the businesses to look at this aspect of intellectual property. And you don't have to create it within yourself. You can buy, you can leverage on purchasing, right? The technology transfers and look at the royalty models and see whether our fabrication or the ability to manufacture something and put some creative content in and then upgrading that. There are a host of opportunities I think Sri Lanka should be looking at from IP. There's a program going, and I don't think we should be worried about the perception is, in my view, is not quite right, but we need to correct it because perception matters at the end of the day. So that is the ongoing program in getting people to move into this arena and to project a strong image in IP.
Thank you. I think that answers that question quite well. Linda, there's one for you. Linda, as a successful entrepreneur, do you bother about bilateral agreements between countries? Questioning because you are able to get success on your own merits, and that too in a very highly competitive market like India.
Actually, it's very much, it's really important. For example, we are really planning to leverage the Indian FTA in a big way. So I mean, as an entrepreneur, I think especially you have to tune into your national framework or what's happening in your country if you're really to kind of be part of that whole system. So bilateral agreements, I mean, you need to be tuned to everything. So it's not really on your own. I mean, as an entrepreneur, you got to leverage everybody, right? Because you just got a vision in your head. And to mobilize that from the government to industries to your own teams to all of that have to be behind you. So I'm not sure why bilateral agreements were taken as an example, but certainly bilateral agreements and everything you can leverage as an entrepreneur, you'll go for. And right now, to get into India, we are just going to full on leverage that more in the future to come.
Do we want to invest capital and adopt technology and take this industry forward? That's the first question. And if yes, what's the strategy? Should we replace tea with some other productive commodity moving on?
It's a related industry, maybe we should have been a better person to answer, but I think we are having, it's an industry which is challenged more due to external factors than internal factors. I think there is because the fact that we are not having this optimal agricultural conditions, that there are shortage of weedicides, the extra environment which is created around tea has had an impact. So I think the operating model that we have will be challenged to sustain it, and I think we will have to look at some other models, because with the cost of labor going up, the cost of labor component in the cost of production going to astronomical proportions. And I think the machinery and the technology being fairly archaic, and with new technology, investment into new technology being difficult in the current circumstances, I think all points to a situation where it may not be sustainable to run these scale of plantations. I think that's my view. I think if we are going to look at alternative crops, I think we have to be looking at again with a very keen eye on the environment, because one of the key factors that we are at high elevations today, even we are getting away with the current situation, is because we have some green coverage which is at over 3,000 to 4,000 feet. So I think that if we go into other crops where it makes the soil more bare, I think we will face a much bigger environmental problem. So an alternative crop which can go here has to be again something which has to be looked into, taking into account the fact that preservation of the environment is a key factor of the development of this country, because sustainability is something which is very, very needed for the tourism and other factors which govern the economy.
Thank you. I have a question for you, Mr. General. How long do you think it takes in mobile money to sort of get off into momentum and take it forward at a space that it really means something? And also, does the fact that Sri Lanka has a quite well-developed banking system, will it sort of be a negative for the fact that mobile money would be slow to take off here, or a factor that will not prevent mobile money taking off here?
Well, it is important. First of all, there must be a clear need for MFS. In our country, for the domestic remittance, this particular means was very useful. Like we have certain hubs where people actually come to get employment. The factories and industries, primarily the garment industries, are located close to the cities for various reasons. Now the workers who work in these factories all come from the village. I've talked about the rickshaw pullers. Likewise, many people actually come to the cities and surrounding places of cities to seek job. Now, they leave behind their families back home in the villages and suburban areas. Now, at the end of the month, obviously, as they get their salary, or when they have a regular income and they need to send the money for the subsistence of their family, they need to have a means. Now, that is to be done through somebody going home after about a month, and everybody would give the money to that individual. Now, you are living completely onto the personal attitude of that person. He could carry 20,000 taka or 20,000 Sri Lankan rupees, give 15,000 and say that I have used 5,000 for my very serious urgent need. I'll give it back after 1 month. And that may not happen at all. And that 5,000 rupees is very precious to a garment worker or a rickshaw puller. Now, when we had this particular need in place, MFS gave the solution. Now, one opening an account back home and the worker having his or her account where she or he is there at the workplace. Now, they can transfer that money in 90 seconds. And it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to land in that particular account where it is sent. That much is the level of security. Now, the other thing was trust. That has to be very trustworthy. This is where our people have issues, obviously, because they earn very little, they send very little, they rely and survive on that little money that they earn. So, the trust earning was one thing that we could do very well. That our money or their money that we deal never got lost. Because even if you lose your mobile phone, the money is not in the mobile phone, it's in the system. So anybody having to know his or her PIN can get the SIM back and use that PIN to actually retrieve the money. So trust was another very important thing. And obviously now, when we are looking at the foreign remittance, they also send it to the bank. And bank, as I mentioned, doesn't have the number of branches in the villages. They want the money to reach his old father or his wife or anybody that is depending on that earning. So the last mile solution is provided by us. The bank would settle the money in the Nostro account. The bank will instruct mobile finance service like us that you send this money to XYZ in the village. And we exactly do that. We are trying for this with our central bank being our regulator to allow that partnership. And central bank is now looking at this seriously because we have a serious depletion of our foreign currency earning because of the informal hundi that's taking place. They're using the platform, avoiding the national exchequer to actually accrue the value. So the money is kept there in the Middle East or Malaysia or Singapore. The recipient is also getting the value appropriately, only that in the loop, the national exchequer is taken out. So we are replicating the same model by telling our regulator that allow us to do the same. You have to bid them in the same game. Otherwise, obviously, the depletion is going to have a tremendous bad impact. So it takes time, the right kind of investment, right kind of people to be brought into the company who can really contribute, and it would take at least 4 years to get the right kind of traction. You have to make people aware as to what this is, how it benefits, and then only they believe in it and start using it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Professor.
We've been looking at some of the success factors, and I think Major General Munir is very right. It's the need. We don't have the kind of migrant worker phenomenon, domestic migrant worker phenomenon that they have in Bangladesh, and ours is a compact country. And the other thing, of course, is the existing methods. You know, the money orders and the postal orders are more or less effective. So we expected this not to be very much an issue in Sri Lanka, that it would be an issue in other countries in our research. However, I got to say that everywhere I go, people are very impressed by the fact that Sri Lanka has been an innovator in 3 mobile companies working together with mobile financial services. Whereas in places like Kenya, where it has been used as a means of sort of competitive advantage for one company, while here we have 3 companies that have been collaborating on mobile money, and that is seen as a major innovation in the mobile financial services sector.
I think our society, while our banking is quite good, and as you said, the need is much less, society is moving to cashless. And as we move to cashless, and I believe that more than credit cards, this is what will be the tool that will, future replace. So it will take some time, but it will fly. And it's more a medium term product than a short term product. Another question that I like to put to maybe the both professors here. Is there a clear strategy to collaborate those government research institutes, collaborate the government research institutes with private sector? If so, there are any success cases?
I suppose you must have a little bit of disagreement in one of these panels. So, I believe that if you really think of the original model, right, every kilogram of tea that goes out of the country, they collect what is called a cess. And that was supposed to fund the Tea Research Institute and so on, right? But when you actually look at the workings of the Tea Research Institute, you look at the workings of the Rubber Research Institute, you find that quite a lot of it has moved down at the village level. What they see is more like enforcement rather than real research flow through and helping the smallholders. Particularly, we've talked to rubber smallholders and tea smallholders in our research, and they really don't see this research coming down to them. So my sense is that, yes, we need to fix it, but proliferation of government research institutes and the throwing of government R&D money isn't the solution. I think you need to go back and look at the Palmyra Research Institute and various kinds of research institutes that I have visited and see what is actually the outcome. What are they producing other than jobs? That's, I think, the question. So I think we need to rethink that. And to a certain extent, the whole idea of creating new institutions, providing R&D, tax breaks, and so on was an admission that the old colonial model of funding Tea Research Institute and Rubber Research Institute and so on using cessors was not working. That we need some novel solution. So that's why I was saying, okay, fix the supply side of the activity, but also look at the demand side. Let's look at where these research innovations actually come and impact at the market level. I'm going beyond getting into the smallholders. I'm saying let's look at how it impacts, these things can result in marketable new products. So I'm not that, I think it could be done, but I think it's a very hard road to go on. On the other hand, I think the universities, we have a possibility that universities, not only universities, but all higher educational institutions, let's bring the whole internships, work experience issue into the center of the conversation. And there, I think the private sector, sometimes when I talk to the universities, they say, we don't have enough support from the private sector. They don't give us enough internship places. I know it takes effort and resources to really support a student. But I think we need to do more of that. I think that's where Moratuwa, in my opinion, has been a pioneer. And I think we need to take that model and see how we can extend it throughout the higher education, tertiary educational system, not just the universities.
Ajit?
First, I will do some defending and then I'll go to the offensive. That is how many of us may know that if you talk about the BG varieties and Sri Lankans, we are having the rice varieties that given us green revolution at some point, being the result of our research institute, the Paddy Research Institute, the Rice Research Institute, Paddy Research Institute. right? Because we are given this BG, we forget there is Batalagoda and etc., etc. So there are tangible stuff that have come out of research institute. Yes, that's the old colonial model for putting on the especially the tea, coconut and rubber. But the point is research institutes have done, but they have been really, really hampered by the input. And of course, Sri Lanka from intellectual property rights time, we need a modification. Plant breeder rights are not recognized in Sri Lanka. So because plant breeder rights are not recognized, some of that effort, I mean plant breeding, this is not an easy, it takes a long time. And then people move away from that. Now we really lack breeders. In Sri Lanka, people do not study, people do not try to be in this area, which are very important because even if you take the Global Innovation Index, the idea is how innovation is going to help feed the billions. We're talking about 9 billion in 10, 30, 20 more years, and we need to innovate on how do we feed, because the agricultural model has to change. It has to be by technology. Unless we absorb, embrace technology, we are going to face a big problem. So institutions, yes, they have delivered, but they need to be revamped, they need to be supported, and one area that the government did was probably the double taxation and then moving on to triple taxation benefit, and also for advanced technology, we were giving accelerated depreciation. We find that none of these instruments were handled well. And probably the new Inland Revenue Act has taken out the taxation thing, which we believe is not quite right. It should be there. The fact that it didn't deliver at that, it was not the problem of the instrument, it's the problem of the execution of the instrument. And when you look at a case of like Canada or Singapore, we see an ease of doing business. In ease of doing business, you can do this R&D, use of this taxation benefit, how to submit to your assessor and get it done. Now, at the moment, what we found was people who have engaged in that, you meet different assessors in different environment, you get 3 different results, and that led to the failure of the taxation system. And I think that need to be looked at rather than abolish the taxation. So that was one thing, but we can do something like innovation vouchers. I think something UK has done and some other countries have done. Innovation vouchers can help more the SME sector, where you give an outright, you have a problem, you come out, this is the amount of money, you go and reach this place has the expertise, you get it resolved. And I think we need to move into this type of area where we can really quickly solve some of the things and gain trust and improve on. There's a whole amount of infrastructure and ability, specifically at the university sector, and private research institutes private research is now coming up very well, need to leverage here.
All right, thank you. I think we have almost run out of time, but I got 2 minutes, and let's try to summarize that with that, because we had quite a diverse discussion here, and it's very difficult to summarize all that points in a very short time. This last question I want to put here is that, it sort of accuses that we Sri Lankans, sit and discuss talks and numbers and figures, which is very interesting. But it says, can we organize, maybe it says a mega workshop, but whatever, to put an action plan with timelines, so that actually we go somewhere. I think I would like everybody to say something about it, as in summary, but I know you've been, and Kosti, one of the things that has been happening is that, Professor Samrajiv is actively involved, his presentation was part of something like that. But do we really have as a country an action plan with responsibilities and timelines that will really take us to this bliss situation where we really start innovating using this technology in making the economy grow better and into production?
Yeah, I think if you start measuring, I think it all comes down to measuring, isn't it? I mean, for example, if you start measuring by the impact you're creating, now I guess in our sector where we are meant to deliver commercial results, you're working private sector with private sector, and for example, the apparel industry has a 5-year strategic plan and they've got a new one as well. But I mean, so that actually there, but the government side, just coming in from the private sector, I mean, we do obviously see a gap, I think, and that question does have some validity and some room for improvement would be my...
Yeah, and even with the IT sector, the SASCOM targets and etc. I mean, is there...
I can give you my broader general comment. So, I mean, clearly execution is a problem I don't want to point finger, in general, in the state sector, in particular, execution is a problem, and where, in a very general sense, where you see that typically that's because of a couple of things. As Linda pointed out, visibility and measurement is a problem. So we don't necessarily have, even if we do have a plan, I don't really see any visibility about progress, about broadcasting where we are, what the metrics are, what the KPIs are. I don't really, from my personal view, I don't really see a lot of accountability. So who individually is responsible for delivering a plan? And what are the consequences of not delivering a plan? I mean, that's in the private sector, we all know how that works. You don't really see a lot of that in the state sector. So having a workshop to come up with a plan, great, but that's not really the problem. The problem is, as we all know, is executing on that plan.
What I would like to, obviously, if you can have a full-fledged plan with timetables and so on and so forth, it'll be wonderful. But what I would think of is, if we can have some success stories, what has been achieved in terms of actual innovation, right? Stories that can be told. What I said is as facts on the ground. And then, what can we use it to bring particular kinds of investment into this country? Not investment for more real estate, for God's sake, right? These are non-tradable sectors. Not more real estate, but investment for innovation, innovation-centric companies that will develop new products and will reach out into the region. If we can target that, and Dumindra, I'm prioritizing it because we have hope that the BOI will take a lead in this, right? So if we can prioritize that and we can have a timetable for that, I think that would be something that I would be very, very happy to support. We are outside the government. The government has to take the leads. What's the point of us coming up with timetables? The government has to take the timetables and assign responsibilities. I would say we're not talking about money. Assign responsibilities to different actors, including the private sector. Assign responsibility to the chamber. They all talk and they all ask things from the government. Tell them something they should do.
Well, even though the question was what can be done at the national level, I'd like to bring it down to what we do in Bikash. And out of 6 years, I'm associated for 4 years with Bikash. We really sit and evaluate almost regularly as to what needs to be done. And we arrive at an action plan, obviously with a timeline. And we target that. We definitely make people responsible and accountable for doing a particular thing, be it market penetration, be it analyzing, be it data kind of collection, and put in place everything that can be done to execute. We tend to say that ideas are 5%, execution is 95%. Thank you.
I think the fact that this is a chamber event and commenting as a former chairman of the chamber, now if we take this event that we have, every year, every session, the key takeaways is summarized and sent to by the Secretariat within 2 months to the subject ministry, giving in highlighted form what was discussed, who discussed, and what are the outcomes. So I think we have, from a chamber point of view, I think we have been continuously doing it, and it's to engage the government and the decision makers on this one. So I think it's a battle that we have to keep continuing, and we have been doing so, and I'm sure that's something we will do so in the future as well.
Quick comment, I'm not really in favor of a major workshop again and another action plan, because if you read what has been written, and I think Samantha made a point about translating what's coming out to the key ministries, it's just acting on as much as possible together on some of the things that we know as deficient and addressing them upfront quickly to build up confidence. We need to build up confidence in our system. And I think collectively there should be need to address some of those problems. One example we know we have tried to tackle, it's what we call the green channel for researchers. In Sri Lanka, a key differentiator is, even if it takes in Singapore, if a person wants something to do, and we do not manufacture a lot of things in Sri Lanka, but even in Singapore, you get it in 48 hours max. In Sri Lanka, it takes 6 months, right? And eliminate that inconsistency, and you are achieving a huge step forward. So likewise, we can identify 10 or 15 key things that need to change to transform this system from the barriers that we face. get the list and attack them up front. That's the key necessity at this stage, because time is of the essence, technology is changing, robots may take over, artificial intelligence is going to beat the natural intelligence, 2030 is an year of singularity. We really need to understand what's going to happen and take stock of it and move fast.
Thank you, Ajit, and okay, we all can stay home and play games. So thank you, panel. Thank you very much, Linda and the gentleman here.